You've given me 18 years. That should mean something. God, it did. And now it doesn't. I need you to sign these. God, the morning Adeline Voss signed her divorce papers, her hand didn't shake. That surprised her. She had expected something. A tremor, a catch in her breath, some physical evidence of the ground falling away beneath her. But her hand moved steadily across the line, the way it always had when she was doing something she knew was right, even when it wasn't what she wanted. She set the pen down. Across the kitchen table, her husband of 18 years, Nathan Voss, was already reaching for the papers before the ink had dried. He was 47, graying at the temples in the way that made men look distinguished and women look tired. He wore a blue Oxford shirt she had ironed herself 3 days earlier, because the housekeeper had called out sick and nobody else had thought to do it. Adeline noticed that now. She noticed it the way you notice a splinter after it's already been there for a week. I appreciate you not making this difficult, he said. She looked at him. He had not asked if she was all right. He had not looked away from the papers. Of course, she said. What Nathan did not know, what no one in their social circle in Galveston knew. Not the women from the garden committee, not his partners at the firm, not his mother, who had always looked at Adeline like she was furniture that had come with the house. Was that 6 months from that morning, Adeline would walk into a room that would make Nathan's face go completely, irretrievably still. That would make the woman beside him, 31 years old, a junior attorney named Kristen, who wore her ambition like a second outfit. Wish she had looked more carefully before she leapt, but we are not there yet. Adeline Marchetti had grown up in a small coastal town in Louisiana called Pellier Point, the kind of town where everyone knew your grandmother's recipe and nobody locked their doors. Her mother, Rose Marchetti, had run a small ceramic studio out of their backyard for 30 years. Hand-built pieces, functional and beautiful, glazed in the colors of the Gulf, salt green, dusk blue, oyster white. She sold them at the Saturday market and to a few loyal galleries and lived, as far as Adeline had always understood, a modest and contented life. When Rose died 3 years before the divorce, she left Adeline a plain white envelope tucked inside the deed box with the house papers. The note inside, in her mother's round, careful handwriting, said only this: "Call Miriam Taft in New Orleans. She will explain what I should have told you sooner. I'm sorry I waited. I wasn't afraid of the secret. I was afraid of what it might change." Adeline had read that note 4 times. Then she had put it back in the envelope, tucked the envelope behind the framed photograph of her mother on the studio shelf, and told herself she would call after the holidays. Then after Nathan's firm anniversary dinner. Then after Thomas's graduation. There was always something. A household did not run itself. Nathan's schedule did not manage itself. A family does not hold itself together. Someone holds it, and that someone had been Adeline, quietly, without credit, for 18 years. The morning after she signed the papers, she found the envelope again. She called the number. Miriam Taft was 72 years old, still sharp enough to make 30-year-olds feel slow, and she had been Rose Marchetti's attorney, business partner, and closest friend for over 4 decades. She did not ask Adeline to come to New Orleans. She drove 3 hours east to Galveston in a silver sedan, and arrived at Adeline's front door with a leather portfolio and a directness that reminded Adeline, painfully and sweetly, of her mother. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where the divorce papers had been signed less than 24 hours before. The coffee was still warm. Miriam told her everything. Rose Marchetti had not been simply a ceramicist at the Saturday market. Beginning in the mid-1980s, working with a small, trusted circle of gallery owners and art advisors, she had been quietly placing her work into private collections. Not selling, building. Piece by piece over 30 years, the Marchetti ceramic work had moved from coastal Louisiana markets into the collections of museums and serious private collectors across the country. One early period collection, 42 pieces from a body of work Rose made between 1987 and 1991, was now held in 3 separate institutions and had appreciated to a value that stopped Adeline's breath. And that was only the beginning. Rose had structured it carefully, a private trust, real estate holdings across 5 properties in Louisiana and Mississippi. A small distillery she had been a silent partner in since 1998 that had, in the last decade, become extraordinarily successful. Royalties from a ceramic technique she had patented in 2003 that was now licensed to manufacturers across the country. "How much?" Adeline asked. Her voice was completely even. She surprised herself with that too. Miriam set the portfolio on the table and folded her hands over it. $640 million, she said, conservatively. The kitchen was absolutely silent. Adeline looked down at her hands. These hands that had organized Nathan's client dinners, chauffeured their daughter to simmer punch practice for 9 years, repotted the plants on the back porch that Nathan never noticed and never would. These same hands were her mother's hands. She had always known that. She just hadn't known what else they carried. She did not cry. She picked up her coffee cup and held it with both hands, the warmth steady against her palms, and felt something inside her, something that had been pressed very flat for a very long time, slowly begin to expand. She told no one. Not her daughter Phoebe, 23, and in her first year of graduate school in Portland. Not her sister Caroline, who loved her completely, and would have called Nathan's mother before sundown just to hear the sound of the woman's voice breaking. Not her friend Ruth, who was loyal and kind and incapable of sitting on information that interesting for longer than 48 hours. She retained a private legal team in Houston. 5 people, no connection to Nathan, or his firm or anyone in their life. She spent 3 weeks in careful, thorough meetings understanding the full architecture of what her mother had built and what she was now responsible for. Then she went to find herself again. She rented a house on the edge of a small hill town in the Texas Hill Country called Mercer Falls. Stone foundation, wide windows, a screened porch that looked out over the cedar breaks and the limestone ridgeline turning gold in the afternoon. She planted a kitchen garden. She bought a second-hand pottery wheel and set it up in the spare room. She started waking up before dawn not because anyone needed anything from her, but because the quiet was so complete, she wanted to be inside it. She began to remember who she had been before she became Nathan's wife, a woman with opinions about light and texture and the way a glaze could hold a story, a woman who had spent summers in her mother's studio, watching something shapeless become, through patience and pressure, something lasting. It was through the Rose Marchetti Trust that she met Callaway Hatch. Callaway was 44, a conservationist and land restoration ecologist, who had spent 15 years working in the Texas Hill Country on cedar removal and native habitat projects. The kind of slow, unglamorous, essential work that very few people understood and almost nobody funded. He had come to the trust with a proposal for a native plant corridor through 400 acres of degraded ranchland east of Mercer Falls. He wrote the proposal himself, 6 pages, clear and precise and plainly in love with the land it described. No photographs of himself, no testimonials, just the work and the reason for it. Adeline read it twice. She scheduled a site visit. He was already there when she arrived, crouched near a limestone outcrop, turning a piece of rock over in his hands with the absorbed attention of someone who is never bored by the thing they're looking at. He stood when he heard her car and walked toward her, unhurried, no performance. His handshake was firm and direct. He was not a man who made small talk with his body language. No checked phone, no wandering gaze. "Thank you for coming out," he said. "Thank you for writing a proposal I could actually read," she said. He smiled. It reached his eyes before it reached his mouth. They walked the 400 acres together. He explained the land with the same plainness he wrote, pointing to where the invasive cedar had choked out the native grasses, where the limestone seeps still held enough moisture to support the beginnings of something, where a creek bed that had run dry for 2 decades could run again if the right conditions were restored. He was not performing for her. He was thinking out loud with someone he had decided, quickly, was worth thinking out loud with. She asked questions that surprised him. He answered them honestly, including the times he said he didn't know. She approved the project before she got back to the car. He came twice a month to meet with her about the restoration progress. The first meetings were professional. The second month they started walking the property together rather than sitting at the porch table. The third month they found themselves standing at the top of the ridge in the late afternoon, watching the sky go amber and neither of them moving to leave. He started staying for dinner. The conversation lasted past the dishes, past dark, into the kind of late evening talking where you stop noticing the time because the time has stopped mattering. He made her feel like someone who was interesting to listen to. This was not a small thing. Nathan had not genuinely listened to her in years. Not the kind of listening where something you say actually lands on another person and changes the shape of their thinking. Calloway listened like her words were worth following to their conclusion. She had forgotten that was something a conversation could do. One evening in December, he was pulling on his jacket to leave. He stopped at the door. He turned. "I want to take you to dinner," he said. "Not out here, somewhere with a reservation." She looked at him. "Is that forward?" he asked, not asking in the way that was fishing for reassurance, but simply asking genuinely, as a man who preferred clarity to assumption. "It's honest," she said. "Same night next week. I'll pick a place. I'll let you," she said. He left. She closed the door and stood in the kitchen with the silence of the house around her, one hand resting flat on the counter, and felt something she hadn't felt in so long that it took her a moment to recognize it. Not excitement exactly. More like the feeling of a window opening. He picked an old farmhouse restaurant 40 minutes from Mercer Falls, quiet, candlelit, tables far enough apart that you could forget the room. He arrived in a dark jacket, no tie, and brought her a small potted cedar seedling. "From the corridor project," he said. "First one we propagated." She took it with both hands. She set it on the windowsill table beside them and looked at it while they waited for their menus. "Most people would bring flowers," she said. "Most people don't know what you've been thinking about every day for the last 3 months," he said. She looked at him. He was watching her with the direct, unhurried attention she had come to know from the ridge walks, from the long evenings on the porch, the attention of a man who is not performing interest, just having it. They talked for 4 hours. Not careful, managed conversation, real talking. About her mother's studio and the smell of the kiln in the morning. About his 15 years restoring land that most people had already given up on, and the particular satisfaction of doing work that takes longer than you'll live to see fully completed. About what it felt like to be 41 and have the distinct impression of being on the verge of your actual life rather than still inside the wrong one. He walked her to her car at the end of the night. The hill country was cold and clear above them, the stars the way they only get when there's no city near enough to argue with them. He turned toward her. He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair from her face. His hand rested at her cheek for a moment, warm and certain against the cold. "Adeline," he said, just her name. She closed her eyes. He kissed her slowly, thoughtfully, the kind of kiss that doesn't rush because it knows exactly where it is. When she opened her eyes, he was watching her with the same quiet attention. He gave the ridge and the creek bed and the things he was serious about. "I've been wanting to do that," he said, "since the first site visit." "The cedar rock," she said. "Yes, that was 4 months ago." "I'm patient," he said simply, "when it matters." She drove home with the cedar seedling in the passenger seat and the windows down despite the cold because she wanted to feel the air exactly as it was and not miss a single second of it. In the meantime, quietly, something large was being set in motion. Miriam Taft brought the idea to Adeline over coffee one Tuesday morning in January. The Rose Marchetti Trust was planning its annual Cultural Endowment Dinner, an evening that brought together gallery directors, museum trustees, collectors, civic arts leaders, and major donors from across Texas and Louisiana. The dinner had been held quietly for years, under the Trust's name, but never with Adeline present, never with Adeline identified as its director, as the woman who held its authority and signed its future. It was time for that to change. "Your mother was invisible by choice," Miriam said, in her direct and loving way. "That was her decision, and it was right for her. But you are the director now, Adeline. The people in that room have been working with this trust for years. They deserve to know who they're working with." 250 invitations went out. Museum directors, gallery owners, collectors, civic leaders, architects, land conservationists, major philanthropists. Among the names on the guest list was Nathan Voss's firm. His name appeared under a philanthropic donor category. His firm had received a small trust grant 4 years earlier for a public arts installation in downtown Galveston. He had never known who signed the check. Adeline read his name on the list. She did not remove it. She went to find a dress. The dinner was held at the Bower House in Houston, a historic estate, lit entirely by candlelight from 200 votives. Warm, dark wood, the kind of room that made people drop their voices automatically, because it felt like it had been waiting to hold something worth saying. Adeline arrived early to walk the room before the guests, the way her mother had always walked the studio before an opening, checking the light, making sure every corner was ready. She was standing near the entrance when she heard the first cars arriving. Nathan came in at 7:15 in a charcoal suit. Kristen beside him in a deep green dress, her hand in the crook of his arm, her posture carrying the particular ease of a woman who has not yet learned what she doesn't know. Nathan worked the entrance the way he always worked rooms, a handshake, a laugh, a name recalled at exactly the right moment. He was very good at rooms. That had always been true. He found a table toward the center. Kristen smoothed his lapel. Miriam Taft stepped to the small podium at the front of the room. The room settled. "Before we get to the evening's program," she began, in the unhurried voice of someone who has earned time and knows it, "I want to tell you about a woman most of you have never met." Nathan accepted a glass of wine from a passing server. Rose Marchetti grew up in Pellier Point, Louisiana. She ran a ceramic studio out of her backyard for 30 years. She drove a truck that was older than some of your careers. She never gave a speech. She never sat on a board. She never asked for her name on anything. But beginning in the mid-1980s, working with a small and trusted circle of advisors, Rose quietly built one of the most significant privately held arts trusts in the American South. She used it without interruption and without a single word of recognition to fund community galleries, artist residencies, cultural programs, and land restoration in towns and parishes that the rest of the arts world had largely forgotten about. She was the most quietly extraordinary person I have ever had the privilege of calling my closest friend. The room was absolutely still. Rose passed 3 years ago. Everything she built, every property, every portfolio, every relationship she cultivated over 40 years. She transferred to her daughter. That woman is in this room tonight. She is the director of the Rose Marchetti Trust. She holds the authority of everything her mother built. Her net worth, conservatively assessed, stands at $640 million. A low current of sound moved through the room. Nathan set his glass down. She is one of the most careful, purposeful women I have ever known. Her mother raised her to believe that the quality of your work matters more than the volume of your recognition. She has spent her life living by that. I have watched her do it. Miriam looked toward the back of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the director of the Rose Marchetti Trust, Adeline Marchetti." The doors opened. She walked in. The applause began before the room had finished understanding what it was seeing. That instinctive response to someone who commands a space not by announcement but simply by the way they inhabit it. She wore a deep amber gown, simple in line, extraordinary in fabric, the kind of dress that doesn't compete with the person wearing it. Her hair was up. She wore her mother's earrings, small ceramic drops in dusk blue, hand-glazed, the only pair Rose ever made for herself. She walked across the candlelit room like a woman who had spent a long time walking through other people's rooms and was only now, for the first time, walking through her own. The applause held. Nathan did not move. He sat perfectly still with his glass halfway to the table, looking at the woman he had called comfortable. The woman he had handed divorce papers to across a kitchen table on a Tuesday morning in March, walking into a room of 250 people with the quiet, total authority of someone who owns the ground and the institution and has owned them for years without making a single sound about it. Kristen leaned toward him. "Do you know her?" He did not answer. Adeline spoke from the front of the room. She spoke about her mother's vision, about the trust's purpose, about the specific ongoing projects, the artist residency in rural Mississippi, the ceramic arts fellowship for first-generation students, the land corridor in the hill country. She spoke plainly and warmly, and without a single word of performance. Every sentence came from knowing the thing, not from needing to be seen knowing it. When she finished, the room stood. Nathan moved through the crowd. He left Kristen at the table without a word and made his way toward Adeline as she stepped down from the small stage. He reached her near the candlelit windows at the edge of the room. Adeline. She turned. His face had come completely apart. The polish was gone. He looked at her the way a man looks when the full arithmetic of a decision falls on him at once, and the sum is worse than he had imagined. "How long?" he said. His voice was quiet and unsteady. "How long has all of this? Your mother. I lived with you for 18 years, Adeline." "I didn't know any of this." "No," she said. "You didn't. I was wrong." He swallowed. He did not look away. "About what I had, about what mattered. About you, Nathan. I made the worst mistake of my life, and I have known it since the morning after you signed those papers." His eyes were wet. He was standing in the middle of a room full of his professional peers, and he did not lower his voice. "I am so sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did to you." She looked at him, not with anger, not with satisfaction, with something quieter and more permanent than either. "I know," she said. "I believe you." He reached for her hand. "Adeline, please, no." Her voice was not sharp. It was the voice of a decision that had been made for a long time. "Not because I'm angry, Nathan. I'm not angry. But the person who signed those papers on that table, that is not a door I'm interested in reopening. Not for any reason." He was still holding her gaze. "I forgive you," she said. "I mean that exactly as much as it sounds like." She paused. "I hope you find your way, I genuinely do. But I've already found mine." She held his gaze one moment longer. Then she turned. Calloway Hatch had been standing near the back wall, a glass of water in his hand, watching. He was in a dark jacket, no tie, the same unhurried posture he had at the Ridge and at the restaurant, and at every moment when he wasn't trying to be anything other than what he was. He made his way through the crowd as she stepped away from Nathan, not rushing, not performing, simply moving toward the person he was there for. He reached her. "You were extraordinary," he said. Not "you did great" or "you crushed it" or any of the words people say when they want credit for recognizing something. Just that. Clean and true. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I was always going to come." The string quartet at the front of the room began to play. Something slow and unhurried that suited the candlelight exactly. He held out his hand. "Dance with me. I should warn you," she said. "I have strong opinions about how this should go." "I know," he said. "You have strong opinions about most things. I find it one of the most useful qualities in a person." She laughed, real and full, the kind that had been gone for a long time. "Then come on," she said. She took his hand. They moved to the floor. She led first, then let him find the rhythm, and he did the way he did everything, by paying close attention and trusting what he felt. He was not a trained dancer. He was present and strong and completely certain about the person in his arms. They found their way to each other quickly, the way they always did, on the Ridge and across the table, and through every conversation that had gone long past the hour it was supposed to end. The room noticed. Conversation dropped by a register. Heads turned. At one point he said something low near her ear, and she tipped her head back and laughed, and he pulled her slightly closer when she did, and the room felt it. That unmistakable thing you cannot manufacture. The recognition of two people are precisely where they are supposed to be. Nathan Voss stood at the edge of the dance floor. He watched Calloway look at Adeline with the kind of attention Nathan had not given another person in years. Full, unhurried, completely private in the middle of a room full of people. He understood, in a way that had no language because it went past language, what he had spent 18 years holding in his hands and put down. Not the money. Not the 640 million or the trust or the name that 250 people in this room now knew, and were already filing carefully away. Her. Just her. The woman who had ironed his shirts and managed his calendar and sat through 300 dinners with his clients and gone to sleep in the same house for 18 years and had never been fully seen. He had done that. He had chosen not to look. He left before dinner was served. He didn't find Kristen. He walked to his car alone, drove 2 blocks, and pulled over under a line of live oaks. He sat there in the dark for a long time, the Houston night moving around him, completely unbothered by him. Kristen called twice. He let it go to voicemail. Back at the Bower House, the candlelight held. Back at the Bower House, Adeline Marchetti was still dancing. 2 weeks after the dinner, Kristen filed a formal complaint with Nathan's firm about a billing dispute that was, in the end, a smaller issue than the way she filed it. Loudly, specifically, with a copy to the state bar. It came out in the weeks that followed that Nathan had blurred several professional lines during the course of their relationship. The firm began a quiet internal review. His name was removed from 2 major client accounts. His corner office moved 2 doors down. His invitation to the managing partner's retreat did not come. He did not fight any of it. He sat alone in his apartment on a Tuesday night, the city doing what cities do, completely indifferent, and looked at his hands for a long time. "I did this," he said. The silence agreed. Adeline found out about it the same way she found out most things, through Miriam, who heard it through a colleague, who said it very matter-of-factly over coffee. Adeline listened. She did not feel satisfaction. She felt the quiet, tired sorrow of watching someone arrive, too late, at a place they could have chosen not to go. Then she went back to the work she was doing. The Cedar Corridor in the hill country broke ground in March. Calloway was there at 6 in the morning with his field crew, coffee in a thermos, his jacket already muddy before the day had properly started. Adeline drove out. She stood at the edge of the site in her boots and watched him work with the focused, unshowy energy of a man who has been doing the important thing for so long that he no longer needs anyone to see him doing it. He looked up, saw her. The smile started in his eyes. She climbed the small ridge to where he was standing, and they stood together looking out over the land. The 400 acres that had been compacted and overrun and left to its worst version, and was now beginning, slowly and certainly, to become something better. "How long before it looks the way you imagine it?" she asked. 20 years minimum, he said, maybe 40, before the grassland really establishes. So we might not live to see it finished. "We won't," he said. "That's what I love about it." She stood beside him and understood that exactly. Her mother had built for 40 years and seen the beginning, not the end. The best things you build are always for the people who come after. He proposed in April, on the screened porch in Mercer Falls, before the morning had properly arrived. The light was the particular pale gold of early spring in the hill country, the cedar breaks just beginning to green at the edges. The air still cold enough that they were both in sweaters. He was holding a ring, a narrow band with a small, round stone, the color of the Gulf at dusk. She recognized the color before she recognized what it was. Her mother's dusk blue. He had asked Miriam what color meant the most to her family, and Miriam had told him. "I know what I am when I'm with you," he said. He was not performing this. He was telling her something true. "I've spent most of my adult life doing work I believed in, and I've been glad of that. But I wasn't. I didn't know this was what I was missing. This specific thing." He looked at her. "I would like to keep not missing it." The cedar seedling from their first dinner sat in a ceramic pot on the porch railing. It had been repotted twice since December. It was, against mild odds, thriving. "Yes," she said. He put the ring on her finger. He kissed her in the way she had come to rely on, the way that didn't hurry and didn't perform and just knew exactly where it was. She called Phoebe that evening. There was a pause on the other end, a long one. "Mom," Phoebe said carefully. "Is this? Are you sure? So soon after?" "I know," Adeline said. "I know how it sounds. Does he?" Phoebe stopped, started again. "Does he make you feel like yourself? Or does he make you feel like you're performing for someone?" Adeline thought about the ridge, the cedar rock, the night at the farmhouse restaurant, every long evening on the porch when the conversation went where it wanted to go and nobody managed it. "He makes me feel like the most interesting person in the room," she said. "Even when there's no room. Even when it's just the two of us and we're not saying anything." There was a silence. "Okay," Phoebe said softly. "Then I'm coming to meet him." She drove down from Portland 2 weekends later and arrived in the afternoon while Calloway was on the porch cutting back the rosemary that had gotten ambitious over winter. She got out of her car and stood in the driveway looking at him, and he set down his shears and walked over and introduced himself plainly. "Calloway, your mother has told me you're studying marine ecology. I've been reading about the seagrass restoration work in the Gulf. I'd like to know what you think about it." Phoebe blinked. They talked for an hour and a half before Adeline could get either of them inside for dinner. At the table, Phoebe sat across from her mother once and watched Calloway say something that made Adeline put her fork down and laugh. The real one, the free one. The laugh that Phoebe had not heard from her mother in years, and had quietly been afraid she would never hear again. And Phoebe looked down at her plate and pressed her lips together for a moment because she was not going to cry at dinner. After, she found her mother in the kitchen doing the dishes. "He's the real thing," Phoebe said quietly. "I know," Adeline said. "Are you happy?" Adeline turned. She looked at her daughter, this young woman with Rose's eyes and her own steadiness, and she felt the full, unhurried weight of everything she had built and lost and found and come toward. "Yes," she said, genuinely. They married in October at the Cedar Corridor site, because Calloway thought it was the right place, and Adeline had agreed immediately. The land was still rough, still in process, still becoming what it was going to be, but there was something growing there now that hadn't been there a year ago. That felt right. Phoebe walked her mother down the uneven path between the cedar and the native grass seedlings, to where Calloway stood in the afternoon light in a dark jacket, looking at Adeline the way he always looked at her, like he was paying full attention to something that fully deserved it. Miriam Taft sat in the front row in a blaze of orange. She did not pretend she wasn't crying. Phoebe stood beside Calloway as the ceremony began and cried once, quickly, when her mother laughed during the vows because the officiant mispronounced Pellier, and Adeline corrected him reflexively, and Calloway reached over and took her hand like he had expected her to do exactly that, and loved her for it. They built a life. Calloway's restoration work expanded. 3 new sites in the region, a partnership with the university, a fellowship program for young ecologists funded by the Trust. Adeline ran the Rose Marchetti Trust the way her mother had built it, without noise, without credit seeking, with the clear and patient attention of someone who knows that the most important work is always the work that takes longer than you expected and matters more than you announced. Phoebe joined the Trust's conservation science panel when she finished her degree. Sunday dinners happened every week when she was in town. Calloway cooked adventurously and with varying success. Adeline fixed things quietly from across the kitchen. Phoebe kept a running tally of his experiments in a notebook she left on the counter where he could definitely see it, and he pretended not to notice it, and all 3 of them understood this to be one of the best jokes of their shared life. There was a morning in late November when the Cedar Corridor was beginning to show what it was going to be. Calloway drove Adeline out at first light and they walked the upper ridge in the cold, their breath visible in the air, the native grass just catching the early sun and making the whole hillside look like something from before anyone had gotten to it. He stopped and turned and looked out over it. She stood beside him. 20 more years, he said quietly. At least, she said. Worth it. She looked at the land, this land that had been compacted and overlooked and left to its worst self for decades, and was now, slowly, stubbornly, turning back toward what it had always had the capacity to be. She thought about her mother in the studio at 4 in the morning, before the Saturday market, hands in the clay, making things that would outlast her. She thought about the envelope in the deed box. She thought about the kitchen table and the pen, and the moment she had believed, for just a second, that her life was ending. It hadn't been ending, it had been clearing, making room for exactly this particular cold morning, this particular man, this piece of land becoming itself beside them. Mom knew, she said softly. Knew what? She watched the light move across the ridge. That the best things take the longest, she said. She just never said it out loud. She just showed me. He reached over and took her hand, held it. They stood there together on the ridge as the morning came in, unhurried, certain, theirs. There is a particular kind of woman who disappears into a life that was never quite hers, who folds herself small and calls it love, who keeps the house running and the calendar full and the peace intact and tells herself this is enough and sometimes almost believes it. Adeline Marchetti was nearly that woman, and then she wasn't. If this story found you today, if you are sitting somewhere tonight, wondering whether the clearing will ever come, it will, not because of the money, not because of the dress or the room or the moment everyone stands up, because of what is already in you that hasn't had enough room yet to grow. It's already there. It's just waiting. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what the time is there. Hit that like button, subscribe, and stay close, because there are more stories like this one on the way. Stories about women who gave everything to the wrong life and then found the right one. You won't want to miss a single one.